Good afternoon. My name is Graham Boettcher and I serve as Executive Director of the Birmingham Museum of Art. I'd like to thank you for joining me this afternoon for a talk that I had intended to give originally, or a version of it, in Indianapolis at Newfields, which is the complex that includes the Indianapolis Museum of Art, but gardens and a historic house, and it's really quite an interesting place. And the Alliance of Newfields, which is the leading volunteer and fundraising organization supporting Newfields, invited me to come up and speak at their annual luncheon. And in brainstorming with one of that organization's officers, who's an old friend from graduate school days, about what I should speak on, landed on this subject. And I think that it was informed in many ways by the work that our curators are doing to transform our collection and bring artists whose work has not been given the attention it deserves into our collections, tell new stories, and also the work of various scholars who are, increasingly, and I'll speak on this in just a moment, writing monographs on artists who, had really rich and fascinating careers, but had not until, recent years begun to receive the sort of scholarly attention and ultimately, attention from museums that they richly deserve. And so since my talk in Indianapolis was canceled, as was every single talk and engagement that I had planned for this spring, I don't think I'm unique in that regard. I'm guessing that many of you, like me, have a lot of credits in your Delta, American Airlines, or what have you accounts that you've got to spend over the next years. So I'm hoping that things will get back to normal soon, so I can begin traveling and eating up some of those airline credits. But it does provide a nice opportunity to talk with you today about some of these same considerations. The artists that I've chosen are a little different. For a slide presentation, or I shouldn't say slide, a PowerPoint presentation. I got to come into the modern age. For a PowerPoint presentation, I could choose whatever I wanted to. So I was going to speak about a blend of Alabama artists, but also Indiana artists, since I was speaking in Indianapolis. Today I'm going to focus on 5 artists whose work is presently hanging in the museum, some of which you've heard me talk about before, but perhaps not in this context, and some which will be new for you. And so really glad that you tuned in today. And I will just kind of launch in and talk about the just as a kind of setting the stage for this, mention that no museum that I'm aware of can purport to give a encyclopedic or fully accurate and complete view of any period in human history with respect to the art that was made during that time. The collections at museums and other institutions are the product of individual choices, choices by curators, choices by the board of trustees, choices by the director. And it is, sometimes these choices were, informed with, good information, with good intentions. Sometimes these choices were, based on racial and gender bias. I think that was certainly the case with our own institution, which was founded in 1951, but did not acquire the work of an African-American artist until 20 years after its founding, 1971, when we were given a work by Henry Ossawa Tanner. A lot has changed since 1971 in terms of the nature of our collections, and things started to change really in 1972 when we purchased the first work by a living African-American artist, Dr. David Driscoll, who recently passed away. But that's just one example. You could easily do a case study of this institution and how its collections were formed over the years, but you could do it with any institution. And I think now with a renewed focus on institutions, namely, well, the big subject these days, rightly so, is institutional racism, but I think it will call into question institutions in general and how they, how they go about doing their business, how they build their collections, how they decide which artists get exhibitions. It extends to that's just the public-facing side, hiring practices, etc. So this is maybe a very timely topic for us because all of the artists that I'm going to speak about today, they all received a great deal of attention during their life. Almost all. There's the first one I'll start with, we know very, very little about her, except that the work is quite exceptional. But with that one exception, the others, you can find scores and scores of newspaper articles and exhibition reviews. Yet when it came time for the books about American art history to be written, these people were largely excluded, or if included, initially got little more than a footnote. That is changed a lot in recent years. Scholars are digging deeper and looking to right some of the inequities of the past and breaking new ground. And so now finally some of these artists are receiving attention they deserve. But let's not be mistaken, there are many, many, many more stories to be told. And that increasingly I think that's going to be the mission of art museums, is to tell untold stories. There's so many places you can go in the world. Don't get me wrong, we love our Albert Bierstadt painting. There's a great story there, but Bierstadt's story gets told by many, many museums. We tell it, I think, we have the opportunity to tell it well, but there are so many artists out there who don't yet have a platform or a context for their stories to be told. So today's talk is really about that. So with that, I'm going to flip funny I should mention Bierstadt. I happen to be pointed in that direction down the long hall. This is the artist about whose work we actually know very little, except that it's really, really expertly done. And we do know a little bit about her, kind of her background. Her name was Rose Pettis Weaver. She was from the state of Alabama, born and died in Selma. She was born in 1863 and then died in 1954. And she was from one of the founding families of Selma, the Weavers, an extremely prominent family that was married into other prominent Selma families. And her sister, we know a great deal more about her. Her sister was Clara Weaver Parrish, who was a painter who ultimately became a stained glass window designer for Tiffany Studios in New York. We believe that Rose Pettis Weaver, we know that she lived with her sister for a period while Clara was in New York, and we believe that that's when Rose took up the study of sculpture formally. But I'm sure there is more information out there. As yet, it remains to be uncovered. But I do know that these are panels for the staircase in her family's home in Selma, and I'm going to take you close so you can really appreciate the exquisite detail. The home, which still stands, was built in 1868, and it is in the sort of Gothic revival style, and so it kind of looks like a baronial hall. In fact, it's often referred to by locals as the castle. And so you can, see that she was trying to evoke a sense of a kind of European splendor in the carved escutcheons and coats of arms, and these, wonderful, splendid dolphin forms, and also these griffins and the W for Weaver. And I'll show you an image of that particular home. Here it is. This is the castle, which is located at 615 Lauderdale Street in Selma. I have not had the pleasure of going into the home. I think when I last visited Selma, the place was still for sale. I probably should have arranged for a realtor to show me around. That would have been cool. But I just walked around the property, and maybe I even peeked in a window or two. Don't tell. But I was very curious to see the interior, particularly to see what staircase was still there. This is the staircase in the house. Forgive the reflection from the photograph, but it's a fairly, I mean, it's a period staircase, but fairly humble. And so for the longest time, we wondered if this staircase that Rose carved for her family was ever installed in the house. And in fact, just today, a nice discovery. When I say research is ongoing, I really mean it. Here is an article that I found just today from the 1964 August 2nd edition of the Selma Times Journal. And I won't get so close that you can read it. It's a little small, but it confirms that in fact there was meant to be a carved staircase in the home, but it was never installed. So these panels were given to us by the great niece of the artist, a woman by the name of Rosalind Lipscomb Forrest. And Rosalind was a painter, an artist herself. She was a painter. And she inherited quite a large number of works by her aunts, both her great aunts, both paintings by Clara Weaver Parrish and carvings, including this carved staircase by Rose Pettis Weaver. And she was very kind and gave us not only works by both women, but also some of her own works because she wanted to be included in that legacy. Interestingly, before she was a painter, she was a textile designer. So we also have a really fabulous dress that Rosalind, who lived in, I believe, Georgia for many years, but ultimately made her home in Huntsville, that Rosalind designed. So we have a really kind of nice, group, a family dynasty of women artists from Alabama in our collection. I've neglected to mention that family included one other artist, Anne Weaver Norton, whose work we also have in the American collection. But there is a lot of work to be done on Rose Pettis Weaver. It would be great to discover exactly where it is she received her artistic training. These are the largest carved sculptural pieces that I have seen by her. Most of the other works that were in Rosalind's possession, I believe one of them, at least one work, was given to the Columbus Museum in Columbus, Georgia. But they were things like fireplace bellows or small boxes, things like that. Very, very kind of small things. This is a full set of staircase panels, and we're just showing you three of what I think there are 5 or 6 total. So really thrilled to have those in the collection, but there's a research project ahead of us, and I think it's something that our curator of American art, Kate Crawford, these are up because she included them in her recent exhibition, Ways of Seeing Buildings and Monuments, and because these are architectural elements, she included them. But she indicated to me when we spoke on the phone earlier today that, yeah, she's excited to do more research and to learn more about Rose Pettis Weaver's story. So we're going to be traveling a bit down the hall, and I'm going to try to walk slowly enough that I don't make you seasick and we don't lose the connection. But I'm going to make a little pause en route to show you the covers of a few books that I recommend in terms of art historians and scholars who are really moving the needle on doing groundbreaking research on women artists from different periods in American art history. Close to home here, the scholar Vicki Lee Ingham did this book, Art of the New South, Women Artists of Birmingham, 1890 to 1950, which was quite a handsome volume. And it was published by the Birmingham Historical Society to accompany an exhibition on a number of notable Birmingham artists, including Lucille Douglas and Carrie Hill, etc. And it's a really superb volume because sometimes the artists who are overlooked and I was going to find the year on this. This was published in 2004. Sometimes the artists are overlooked not just because of gender or race, but also because of kind of regional bias. The southern artists often get particularly short shrift in volumes looking at the art of the United States as if the entire region didn't exist at all. That is beginning to change, but they are, that's another consideration that I hadn't mentioned before. Today you'll hear me talk about the work of Meta Warwick Fuller. Some people, there's a kind of, variations on her first name. Some scholars refer to her as Meta, others as Meta. I'm going to go with Meta. That's the pronunciation they use in the PBS documentary about her life and work, in which this scholar appears on screen, Renee Ader. And this is a book, I believe, from 2011, Remaking Race and History, the sculpture of Meta Warwick Fuller. And so we'll talk more in just a moment about her work. We just acquired, maybe 2 years ago, a work by Fuller for our permanent collection. My former colleague here in Birmingham, who went on to Chicago after she left Birmingham, Jeffreen Hayes, Dr. Jeffreen Hayes, recently curated an exhibition on the work of Augusta Savage, published this very fine catalog, which, it's exciting because there are so many new discoveries contained in these volumes, things that you won't find anyplace else, and they're the product of hours and hours and hours of research, exhaustive research in libraries and archives and digitized newspaper records. And then finally, hot off the press is this work, all by Vicki Lee Ingham, who wrote The Art of New South. This is a monograph on Lucille Sinclair Douglas, who was a artist from Alabama who went on to work in China and Southeast Asia and did remarkable etchings of Angkor Wat, which we have one in our collection. I believe the Metropolitan Museum of Art has the full run of them. So really exciting. So these are just a few recommended readings, by no means an exhaustive list, but things that were on my mind as I was thinking about what to speak on today. These were close at hand on my bookshelf. All right, so now we'll head into the inner sanctum, into the American Gallery proper. And we're going to start with the work of Mary Josephine Walters. Now, I think some of you remember my talking about Mary Josephine Walters previously. Probably I talked about her in the past in the context of landscape painting or the Hudson River School. Mary Josephine Walters was born in 1837. She died in 1883. And she sometimes exhibited under the name MJ, or the initials MJ Walters. And this was not accidental. It was fairly common practice in the 19th and even into the 20th century for women in the artistic profession to adopt a name, or you could say in this case it was just her initials, but in other cases it was kind of a pseudonym, which would not reveal their gender. That was also common practice among authors in the 19th and early 20th centuries, because there was so much prejudice against women in these particular pursuits that sometimes their gender would be held against them, just as we'll hear in a moment. Sometimes their racial identity was held against them as well. So this is a case where I think to increase her likelihood of being accepted and clearing obstacles, she sometimes just submitted work for exhibition under the name MJ Walters. But she was Mary Josephine Walters, and she studied with the the landscape painter, Hudson River School painter, Asher B. Durand. And in fact, in Durand's biography written by his son, John, John mentions Mary Josephine and briefly, not at length, but talks about how his father was particularly interested in her career, and I think you can see why. The talent is clearly first rate. There is, especially the way that the foliage is conceived. This is entitled "In the Woods." Painted around 1865, and the detail is just remarkable, from the curling bark of the paper birch to the fronds on the fern plants, just every bit of moss, every lichen, every leaf clearly shows the influence of the English artist, art critic, and theorist John Ruskin, who believed that there needs to be strong evidence of labor in a work of art, and that the artist's labor should be focused on creating truthful transcriptions of what he or she saw, and this certainly qualifies. It's also an homage to her mentor. This is a painting from the previous decade, from 1855, entitled "In the Woods" by Durand, which is in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. But I think you can see, even though that there's a clear connection between the two, particularly with this Gothic arch in nature, sort of evoking the forest cathedral, reminiscent of poems by William Cullen Bryant. Something, the coloration is all her own. This is a much more verdant and green forest. It's more light-filled. It's just a much more lush environment. In terms of what we know about her biography, it's little. We're learning more and more all the time. That's thanks to the efforts of curators, but also art dealers. I want to give a shout out to Jennifer Krieger, owner of Hawthorne Gallery in New York City. She has made it part of her work as a gallery owner to find and promote and ultimately sell, especially to the work of important women artists working in the 19th and early 20th century. And thanks to her efforts, there have been some remarkable pieces that have come forward. Some by artists like Walters, Eliza Greatorex, Juliet Hart Beers Kempson, and then by artists that are very, very little known, maybe only created one or two works, but the quality of the work speaks for itself. And so there's some of these artists, there's still a lot of research to be done, but thanks to the efforts of many, but including not just on the academy side or the museum side, but in the art market side, that work is advancing. We know that she never married. It's also believed that she accompanied Durand on trips into the Catskills, and this practice of observing nature directly and making these small oil sketches. This is a rather large work, one of her larger works, and I'll, just for scale, I gotta flip the camera, I'm sorry. For scale, I will stand next to it, and that gives you a sense of how big this is. I'm gonna flip it around so you don't have to look at me. There we go. And so she was kind of schooled, I guess you could say, in the kind of some of the best practices of the Hudson River School. She maintained her own studio, I think initially in New York and then later in New Jersey. And there are, I think once in a while a new work by her comes up, something comes up at auction and, is new to the market, and it's a new discovery. But institutionally, I know this is a really significant example of her work that we have here in Birmingham, and then the New York Historical Society has a really, really superb example of her work as well. How did we get this particular work in the collection here in Birmingham? It previously belonged to a private club. There was a private club called the Downtown Club, which was dissolved, and their assets were absorbed by the club. And then the club decided that it didn't really need, those of you who have been to the club on Red Mountain know that the style of the club is, mid-century modern, and that a collection of 19th century American paintings they kind of looked a little out of place. So they never had them on view there. They had them on long-term loan to the museum, and we eventually got the opportunity to purchase them back in 2008, so not long after I arrived here in Birmingham. And this was, of all the paintings in the collection, there were two that I was really, really excited about. This one by Walters, and then a snow Bierstadt. So I'm really, really thrilled that we were able to add this to our permanent collection, because I think it is one of the best examples I've seen of her work anywhere. All right, so we are going to turn the corner. And, there's work by women artists everywhere. I could talk about Jane Stewart, although I have talked about her a couple times already, which is why I'm not going into depth about her today. This is her portrait of Oliver Hazard Perry. I could also talk about Sarah Miriam Peele. This is her portrait of Dixon Hall Lewis, which I've also given an entire talk about. So no lack of subject matter in our galleries. But I want to turn my attention to an artist about whom I don't believe I've said anything yet, and it is a sculptor named Helen Gertrude Zoller. Now, Helen Gertrude Zoller is by no means a household name. Even longtime sculpture dealers that I have mentioned Zoller's name to are like, who? What? Like, what's I know about her? Yet, when you look back in newspaper archives, and I spend a lot of time on newspapers.com, you will find article after article on Helen Gertrude Zoller, and especially about this particular work. This work has taken on various meanings over the years. It is called Spirit of Revolt, and it was created in 1915. It was cast by Roman Bronze Works in Brooklyn, though she cast other copies with a number of foundries, including the Kunst Bronze Foundry as well. Then she copyrighted it in 1917, which is a good thing. Those of you who heard me talk about James Earl Fraser's End of the Trail heard me talk about what happened to him because he failed to copyright it in time, and there were just all sorts of lousy copies of his work out there for which he received no remuneration. And this was given to us several years ago by dear friends of mine. This was a gift of my friend Bob Scharfenstein in loving memory of his partner and husband of 51 years, Dr. Bill Mason. And Bob and Bill did so much to build our collection, and they even founded a museum in Georgia called the Mason Scharfenstein Museum of Art at Piedmont College. This was a particularly special thing to have come into the collection in honor of Bill Mason, because this is a work that I was responsible for bringing to Birmingham. We purchased it from Child's Gallery in Boston, and we didn't acquire it directly for the museum. We placed it in Bill and Bob's collection, and that's something that we do. Kind of one of our mantras has been bring art to Birmingham. We have a lot of wonderful homegrown art here too, but in terms of historic American art, which is my field, we're always looking to build the collection in interesting ways, and this was a great opportunity to add a work that is very compelling, and I want to get close so you can see how she has sculpted the figure. And he is chained to a rock. And like I said, the title is Spirit of Revolt. And initially, when she created this, it was understood as her artistic response to the First World War. And according to one article, the model was a young man from Dalmatia who had fled Europe at the outset of the First World War. And it's interesting because it has taken on other meanings over the years. And for those of you, Dalmatia is part of present-day Croatia, if you don't already know that. And he fled his homeland to avoid military service. But for Zoller, the figure represented, she actually was quoted in a newspaper as saying it represents, quote, the struggle of the oppressed of all history, the youth, intelligence, and hope that fight for ideas were in the mind of the artist in shaping this figure of tense determination. And it's, I think you can see the obvious connection. It's reminiscent of depictions of Prometheus, the Greek titan whose punishment for stealing fire from the gods and giving it to mankind was to be chained to a rock and to have his liver perpetually eaten by a gigantic eagle, which fortunately regenerated itself, but it was a kind of perpetual punishment. And this continued to be her most popular work. It continued to be exhibited through the war and well into the 1930s. And in newspapers around the country, it continued to be published. I'm showing you the Baltimore Sun from 1921. And you'll see it says, "The Spirit of Revolt, an effort by Helen Zoller to depict the discontent that speeds the world from the is toward the should be." So by 1921, that was how it was being interpreted. And I'll show you, forgive me while I pick up my props. Here is another one also from 1921. But this is from the Lecompton Sun in Lecompton, Kansas. "The Spirit of Revolt, the work of Helen Zoller, one of the country's most noted sculptors. It typifies the sullen, brooding, discontented spirit of one beset by conventions and conditions he can neither violate nor accept." End quote. So two similar in some ways, but different interpretations of a work that was originally seen in the light of the First World War. So it indicates two things. One, the kind of living quality that works of art take on, that their meaning can change and morph over time in new contexts. It may have one context in wartime, another in peace, and depending on what's going on in the world. But also the other thing more important to this talk is that it indicates the staying power of the work, that what was written about in 1915 is still being talked about in the early 1920s and all the way into the 1930s. To give you some sense of the high regard in which she was held, this particular cast of Spirit of Revolt was presented to William Rhinelander Stewart. I think some of you are familiar with that family, the Rhinelander Mansion in New York. Very, very prominent New York family. William Rhinelander Stewart served on the New York Board of Charities, and this was presented to him. And I won't be able to show you the inscription, but you can kind of make it out at the bottom for his service on that board. And so I think it's a fantastic piece, but one of the things that I note over and over again in the articles on Helen Gertrude Zoller, it consistently refers to her as one of the country's most noted sculptors over and over again. Yet by the time we acquired this, or the time that it came to Birmingham in 2006, I think just months after I arrived here that fall, By the time, this came to Birmingham, no one had ever heard of Helen Gertrude Zoller. So how did a sculptor whose work was so widely hailed publicly during her lifetime, how did she fade from obscurity? And this goes back to art. Any history is a series of choices. Things are, scholars choose to include things, institutions choose to include things, or they choose to omit them. Sometimes the choices are personal, sometimes they're institutional, but at some point, her name someone chose, or not maybe just one person, but the individuals who were the earliest scholars of American sculpture did not include Zoller. And then because subsequent scholarship is so often built upon previous scholarship, it took a long time for her name to reemerge. In fact, I would say this is one case where her name hasn't fully reemerged yet. I think that we've got an obligation, institution that has Helen Gertrude Zoller's work on view to tell her story. And that's something that we will take on. I talk about her work frequently. It's in a prominent location in context with, you could see George Bellows's World War I painting in the background. So it has the two works speak to one another. But we have an obligation as an institution to tell her story because we are one of the few institutions to show her, to have her work or to show her work. All right, so moving on around the corner. Bear with me. All right, so if I mention I'm going to talk about a painter named Georgia, everyone immediately thinks of Georgia O'Keeffe, I'm sure. This is her Green Apple, 1922. Georgia O'Keeffe has received showers and showers of attention. I mean, she is an iconic artist who had a long career and is included in major collections, not just here, but elsewhere. Elsewhere in the world. So she is an artist who made the cut, who is considered canonical. If you look at exhibitions, top grossing exhibitions of American artists, it's often Georgia O'Keeffe, kind of up there with Andy Warhol and Norman Rockwell. So she, is successful by many, many different measures of success. However, there's another artist named Georgia who happens to be part of Georgia O'Keeffe's circle, and that is Georgia Engelhardt. Georgia Engelhardt was Georgia O'Keeffe's niece by marriage. It was actually Stieglitz's niece, and they used to spend time together at the family compound in Lake George, where they sometimes went apple picking together. Coincidence? I think not. This is Green Apple. But it was sometimes said that Georgia Engelhardt was the only member of the extended O'Keeffe family that, or extended Stieglitz family that O'Keeffe really enjoyed spending much time with. And in some ways, you could think of Georgia Engelhardt as the closest thing to a pupil that Georgia O'Keeffe ever had. Though I think sometimes the influence flowed in both directions. There are some subjects which O'Keeffe later painted, which Engelhardt did earlier. I think that Engelhardt's Jack in the Pulpit painting may predate O'Keeffe's. I'd have to check on that, but that seems to be my recollection. So I don't know, I think our instinct, because, Georgia O'Keeffe was born in 1887, Engelhardt was born in 1906, so one was senior to the other. The instinct may be to think of one as teacher and one as student. But I think in some ways maybe they were just women working together who enjoyed one another's company and enjoyed being creative together. Now, Georgia Engelhardt, this is a painting called Church from around 1930. And this is a subject that she explored in at least one other painting, which I think this was, we can't find out. Someone out there may know this work specifically. From what I could find online, it was exhibited at one point at the Crystal Bridges Museum in Bentonville, Arkansas. And I think you can see the strong similarity in the church with that pointy spire. But in this case, I think it's even more pronounced. It's a sharply vertical work, very, very narrow. And you have these, this kind of endless valley and these, mountains, these walls of the valley, quite mountainous in the background. Maybe this is Georgia Engelhardt giving some indication of what her future career would be. She went on to become a world-famous mountain climber. Here is a photo of her. This is from the White Museum of the Canadian Rockies, and she did a lot of mountain climbing in the Rockies, and in Canadian Rockies rather specifically. And in fact, there is a Mount Engelhardt in Canada named for her. She was so famous as a mountain climber that in fact there was a full-page Camel cigarette ad where she is the spokesperson, the celebrity, pitching Camel cigarettes for health, which we now know is completely. But I think some of you have seen old cigarette ads from that period, from the first half of the 20th century, know that they were often sold as being invigorating and healthful, which was actually the opposite. So just a little footnote there. But Georgia Engelhardt is just, she is getting more and more attention. I think there has been some wonderful attention recently to other artists in Georgia O'Keeffe's orbit, namely, most recently, Sue Canterbury at the Dallas Museum of Art curated a magnificent on Georgia O'Keeffe's sister, Ida O'Keeffe, which we like to claim as an Alabama artist because she actually did spend a little over a year teaching art here in Alabama. Sue organized a fantastic Ida O'Keeffe show for the Dallas Museum of Art, which then traveled. I got to see it up at the Clark Art Institute in Massachusetts last summer. And that was fantastic. And then, in Georgia Engelhardt, her work, some of it is held in private collections, but you see more and more of it, in museum contexts, if not owned by museums, certainly included in museum exhibitions. I should mention that the family, since there were two Georgias in the family, they often referred to her as Little Georgia or Georgia Minor. But I hope you will agree, by looking at this composition, there's really nothing minor about it. It is a really fantastic example of the modern impulse in American art at this time. I'm really, really thrilled to have it in our collection. Finally, I want to conclude with the work of Meta Warwick Fuller. And I will tell you, I think I mentioned that there was some dispute as to the pronunciation of her name. Until recently, I think I was among those calling her Meta Warwick Fuller. But I just watched a wonderful PBS documentary online, which I will include the link to in the Facebook comments, and she's referred to there as Meta. And so I think I'm going with that pronunciation, especially since it included the leading scholars on her work. I'm guessing they probably know way better than I the proper pronunciation of her name. So Meta Warwick Fuller. She was born in Philadelphia in 1877, and she died in Framingham, Massachusetts in 1968. She was born to a very prosperous family. Her Her father owned his own barber shop, and her mother was a hairstylist, and they were, part of the African American cultural elite in Philadelphia at that time. And they stressed in her at a very young age the importance of cultural experiences. And she later wrote and spoke about how her father took her to see art. She was enrolled in dance classes. So dance, music, the visual arts were part of her upbringing from a very early age. Her family was also extremely well connected in artistic circles, and she eventually made her way to Paris. She did train in Philadelphia initially, but I think those of you who heard me speak about another artist who worked in Philadelphia, born in Pittsburgh, but trained in Philadelphia, Henry Ossawa Tanner, you may remember that I talked about some of the obstacles that Tanner faced because of his race in working as an artist in this country at that time. And Meta Warrick Fuller not only faced discrimination on the basis of her race, she faced it on the basis of her gender. The art world in Philadelphia and elsewhere in the United States at that time wasn't just a boys' club, it was a white boys' club. And accordingly, she was, because of the kind of closed circle that it was, there was very little room for any women, let alone a woman of color. And so she decided to make her way to Paris to increase her opportunities, to study the great works of previous artists in the museums of Paris and the Louvre. Also a very exciting place at the time because Rodin was working there, and that figures into her story. Well, unfortunately, although overall and ultimately Fuller really had magnificent opportunities in Paris, her first day in Paris was filled with kind of racism and exclusion. A relative had arranged for none other than Henry Ossawa Tanner to meet Fuller at the train station when she arrived in Paris. But her train was early, and so she made her way on her own to the, I believe it was called was it the American Women's Club or Girls Club? Forgive me, I don't remember exactly the name, but it was a private club for young women from the United States. If they were traveling abroad to study, they were permitted to stay in this club. And so she made her way there on her own, and I will quote from her reminiscences that Fuller remembered that the director said, "You didn't tell me that you were not a white girl." And she replied, "I was told that the club was here for American girls who came to Paris to study, and I felt that I, as an American girl, was entitled to come." She eventually found her own apartment. She was not permitted to stay in this club. It was called the American Girls Club. I found my little cheat sheet. But it was kind of a shock to have her first day in Paris be filled with American-style racism at this American club, or maybe it was what she had left America to escape. She eventually became fully steeped in the art world of Paris. She was enrolled in art school. She was going to exhibitions, and she was living her best life, and she was very excited ultimately to have the chance to meet Auguste Rodin, who took her through his studios, and she was very, very struck by the opportunity to not only to meet him and see his work, but his manner of working is what impressed her most, the kind of direct evidence of the artist's hand in the work. And I think you can see from this example, which is entitled Waterboy of 1930, that she never, and I'll tell you more about the subject in just a moment, she never wishes to really erase that evidence of the artist's hand, that you feel a sense of her own hand being present in the sculpting of the work. This is not, it has a roughness, and I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. I mean that in a way that it feels kind of immediate, that it is coming directly from her mind through her hand into the materials. And that's something that's sometimes lost, particularly when a work sculpted in clay and then translated into bronze through the casting process. That's sometimes lost, and you lose that sense of immediacy, and you end up with something that kind of looks, has an even surface all over and is smooth and shiny, and really effaces that feeling of the direct contact with the artist herself in this case. And so that was a really transformative experience for Fuller. And she was quoted as saying, "Rodin is the master of them all. My heart went out, and with clenched fists, I determined to fulfill my promise." And that is exactly what she did. She ended up being one of the handful of Americans, let alone American women, who were exhibiting alongside her French. When she ultimately returned to the United States, it led to numerous commissions. She became friends with W.E.B. Du Bois, who became a champion of her work and encouraged her to engage in African and African American subjects, and she received a number of prominent commissions to show at different World's Fairs and expositions, and became very, very well known in her time. But again, she faced, when she was back in the States, countless obstacles on the basis of her gender and her race. She also encountered other setbacks. In her family, her husband did not support her work as an artist. He wanted her to be at home, raising their family. She had to create a sort of secret studio for herself in her attic, where she would go up and work whenever she could. And she also kept a warehouse which was filled from her work, filled with her work from Paris, which sadly caught fire, and she lost nearly all of her early work in that conflagration, which was an incredibly demoralizing moment for her. But another thing that she achieved is that there were other African American women sculptors who came after her, who provided, she was an inspiration for many of these women, because they had been able to see how she had achieved notoriety and success in her own lifetime. At the end of her life, she was living in Framingham, Massachusetts, and when she died, she left a large body of work to the Danforth Museum in Framingham, which has the largest collection of her work, I believe, of any institution. And so you can look, I'll post a link to that, as well as the documentary, so that you can see some other examples of her work. But this is a work we were thrilled to acquire back in 2018, and I want to unpack the subject matter for you. It is entitled The Water Boy, and this very much falls into the vein of what W.E.B. Du Bois was encouraging her to do, which was to create works that were based on, kind of evocative of, Black history, both in Africa and in the United States. And the inspiration for this piece was, in fact, a traditional folk song, The Water Boy. And that is a song which was, later recorded by Roland Hayes, Fats Waller, and Paul Robeson, among others. And very, it's a song that has a call and response feel to it, and the refrain is "Water boy, where you hidin'?" And it is, it is about a water boy bringing water to the workers on a cotton plantation. And so this is a very significant work. I was talking earlier with our curator of American art, Kate Crawford, and we were talking about how great it would be that when visitors come to see this, they could actually hear one of the recordings, and it continues to be recorded by contemporary singers. Hear a recording of the very song that inspired this work. And like I said, Meta Warwick Fuller was raised not just on the visual arts, but on dance and on music. And so this is a great way great example of how that experience as a young child continued to influence her throughout her lifetime. So with that, I'm going to turn the camera back on me for a moment. Thank you for being with me today. We're going to make some changes to the schedule. I unfortunately have to skip this Wednesday. I have got a online workshop that I need to attend that is pretty much a whole day commitment. On Friday, I have a special treat for everyone. We will be in the library, in the Hanson Library here at the museum, the largest fine arts library in the state of Alabama, one of the largest in the region, in fact. And our librarian, Laura Woodard, will be sharing with all of you selections from our rare book room. So we're going to throw back the curtain and allow you to see a part of the museum that some people don't even realize that we have, and we aim to change that. Now that we have a full-time librarian again, once COVID-19 passes and we can reopen to the general public, there will be regular visiting hours that are advertised so people can come and use those resources and discover some of the treasures of that collection. So that's the first announcement. The second announcement is that I am going to cut down to 1 day a week. So beginning next week, we're just going to be broadcasting on Wednesdays. As things are starting to normalize a little bit here at the museum, my demands on my time are increasing. But it's also the summer, and I want to be able to take a vacation, as I think some of you will be doing too. I don't know that I'll be able to go anywhere, and so committing myself to things on Mondays and Fridays makes that difficult. So we're going to cut back to 1 day a week. My regular broadcast beginning next week will be Wednesday at 2 p.m. But I think by this point, I have done, this might be my 35th broadcast over the course of the pandemic. And so if you miss me those other 2 days of the week and you haven't already seen all of my broadcasts, you can go back online and see the past talks, which have all been archived on our website. So I just want to thank you again for staying the course with me through these now 3 months. I appreciate each and every one of you tuning in, but I really, as I've said many times before, really look forward to having you here with us in person. And for those of you who are watching from distant locations, whether it's Seattle or Oslo or points in between, y'all come to Birmingham. It's an open invitation, and I will make sure to give you a personal tour. Y'all take care and be well and be